Hello, everyone. I'd like to start with excusing my host voice for this afternoon. Clearly, I've been enjoying LLF a bit too much. I'd like to take a moment to thank LLF and especially my dear friend Razi, who has made such a thoughtful gesture in dedicating today's session to a man who spent his life serving others. Someone who as a child, like many others, was very passionate about sports, but he took that love and used it for a much greater purpose, and that was to serve humanity, and in particularly his country. A man I'm proud to call my father, Ashiq Qureshi. Thank you. My father believed in the power of sports to bring about social change. His philanthropic journey may have started from the very onset officially as a treasurer for Shaukat Khanam, for which he was a board member till the very end. But then it culminated in the first ever Veterans Cricket platform, which is the Pakistan's Veterans Cricket Association and the only Veterans Cricket Association there is in the country today. He led that in 2 decades. He took it from 0 cities to 70 and then international. And he did all of this by gathering a support network and mobilizing communities in an effort to create and to make a sustainable model. It is now a platform that not only focuses on the physical fitness of over 50-year-olds, but also has opened up job prospects for this neglected age bracket. And importantly, it has been used to develop rundown and unused grounds all over the country, and for football and also for cricket fields, complete with first-class pavilions. In light of this, one of the best success stories of his efforts, I think, is when he took these young Chitrali boys who had never left the country. He gave them, with his team, this sort of a neat ground, a decent ground, a little bit of training, and they went on to represent Pakistan in Barcelona. And now they're currently part of Pakistan's national football team. That's brilliant. So, sport truly has the power to inspire, to unite, to hone characters, and to build nations. So for that, in the end, I'd like to thank LLF for recognizing his relentless hard work, his selflessness, and his contributions to causes that I'm happy to say are still ongoing even today, and long may they continue. And today, talking on cricket, citizenship, and the post-colonial narrative, Omar Shahid Hamid, a serving member of the police service of Pakistan, where he has served as head of Karachi's counter-terrorism cell. Omar Shahid Hamid has also authored 4 books, including his latest on the high-stakes world match fixing in cricket, The Fix. With him is Romesh Gunesekera, a Sri Lankan-born British author of 8 books, including Reef, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, also a fellow of the Royal Society for Literature since 2004. And moderating the session will be Georgina Godwin, who was born and brought up in Zimbabwe. Georgina Godwin is a prolific broadcaster and columnist who is currently the books editor for Monocle's online arm, Monocle 24, and anchors literary and current affairs programming for the outlet. Please give a nice round of applause for them.
Thank you so much, and also for that tribute to clearly a very great man. Welcome, and thank you all for coming. And after that introduction, luckily you've saved me a job. But what I can point out about the 3 of us is that we are from Sri Lanka, from Pakistan, and from Zimbabwe. And of course, those 3 countries all have something in common. they're all great cricketing nations, and they were all colonized by the British at one time. And that, of course, feeds into exactly what we're here to talk about today, which is cricket, citizenship, and the post-colonial narrative. Now, the great West Indian C.L.R. James says, or wrote, "What do they know of cricket that only cricket know?" And I think that really feeds into everything, because one man who knows a great deal about much more than cricket is Omar. And I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of your backstory, because it's so fascinating.
Is this working? Yes. Thank you, Georgina. I'm not sure I know that much more, or I'm not sure I know that much about cricket either. But yeah, it's a bit of a strange journey, writing on cricket from being a police officer. And certainly my previous books don't dwell on cricket, but really I stumbled onto it because being a police officer, well, I'm a cricket fan, and being a police officer, one has access to the seedier side of society. So, you're able to get access to people like gamblers and bookies who are able to tell you great stories, and if you can spin them into a book, then all the better for you.
And I mean, but you've got all this, it sounds, your own life sounds almost like a movie with all of this kind of attacks and being arrested.
I'm happy to sell the rights.
And speaking of that, I mean, of course, you have sold the rights to some of your work.
I have, yeah. A couple of my earlier books have been optioned, and I believe they will be produced as limited sort of Netflix or Amazon Prime or streaming services in the near future. Sorry, is this better? I'm usually very loudly. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Romesh, and you need to switch yours on. And also to tell us your backstory, because of course, although you are Sri Lankan, you grew up a lot in the Philippines, and that's reflected in your cricket book, The Match.
Well, to begin with, I'm really terrified to be here because I'm right next to a policeman here. And as a fiction writer, I'm always telling lies. And I'm here as an imposter because I know very little about cricket. So on all counts, it's very scary. So block your ears.
That makes two of us.
Okay, good, fine, right. We can be brothers in crime then. Background-wise, yes, I was born in Sri Lanka at a time when, Sri Lanka's history in cricket is really interesting. It goes back a very, very long way. I think one of the longest-standing cricket fixtures in the world is the Royal Thomaian match in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, which is a match between two schools. I can't now remember when it started, but it was in the 1880s, something like that. And it's an annual cricket match, which many of you here in Lahore will recognize if you go to the match. It's a very South Asian spectacle, I guess, with a lot of emotions running high. I spent my teenage years in the Philippines, where, of course, they don't play cricket at all. And it's quite a unique country in that sense. It's unique for lots of things. It was the only American colony, as it were, in Asia at the time, the only Hispanic influenced country in Asia, the only Catholic country in Asia for a long time. They play baseball, they don't play cricket. But very, very unusually, I discovered it's probably one of the few countries where the British had a kind of influence, in the sense that they did take over the Philippines for about 2 or 4 years, I can't remember, at the turn of the last century. So very, very briefly became part of the British business, as it were, but they forgot about the cricket. So there was no cricket. And I've been writing mainly about stories that are set in Sri Lanka, and the backdrop has always been the civil war, the long-standing civil war. But at one point I thought I'd like to tell a slightly happier story. And the happy story about Sri Lanka at the time was its rise in cricket. It's not such a happy story today, I think, Sri Lankan cricket, but at the time it was. And so I wrote this book, The Match, in which the Sri Lankan cricket team makes quite a big appearance in the book.
Can you give us a little snapshot of the plot of the match?
Well, if I can remember it, because it did come out about 15 years ago. It's one of the first cricket-related novels, I think, around. Before this book came out, you found cricket in a few English-language novels, but they were, on the whole, village cricket in very kind of P.G. Wodehouse-type novels. And occasional appearances in a few great Indian novels. So I think Vikram said Suitable Boy has a few pages on a cricket match and so on. But nowhere was it central to the book. And I thought I'd write one before somebody else did. The plot of it, my challenge was not being a cricketer, but I know a little bit about cricket. I played, schoolboy type cricket. But I'm not a team player. So to write about cricket was going to be quite a challenge for me. And the other thing was I wanted to write about the Philippines, which I did know from growing up there and which I hadn't written about. And so I kind of put the two together. And in this, the first half of it, I suppose, is the Philippines in the 1960s, 70s, where these expats basically start playing cricket and have cricket matches. And interestingly, the main hero of the cricket match is a girl. So it's before the sort of the current scene with cricket. But I did pick up a line, I remember, from a newspaper where back in the 1930s, there was a Muslim girl in Colombo who was leading a team. And she had a very passionate article in the newspaper saying, why not? And we should have the chance to play this game and so on, which is very inspirational. So the story is about a man who discovers his passion for cricket late in life, a Sri Lankan man who was originally in the Philippines and then moves to London. And his passion is aroused when the Sri Lankan team visit London on one of their tours. And he watches this team play England and mainly India. There's a big match, there's a one-day match at the Oval, which I write about. I might actually read from that a little later maybe, or whenever. And so it's about his discovery of the passions of cricket and the idea of identity. He was trying to work out who he is, what is his loyalty. And I was really interested about why we are loyal to teams, whether it's cricket or football or whatever. And this interesting kind of love affair you have with a team, which you sometimes become more deeply in love the worse they play. And it's like a marriage to failure. You just watch something fail, and you're still deeply involved.
Yes, yeah. Omar, let's talk about the fix, because you have chosen a women's cricket team. Firstly, why that?
I think when I sort of decided to write about cricket, I found that, especially in South Asia, I was going to say in Pakistan, but actually it's true across South Asia, that we're all cricket crazy. And we all love conspiracies, and the sort of perfect mixture of that is match fixing. And if you kind of go through various accounts of it, it's a morality tale as good as anything that Shakespeare or Marlowe may have written. If you're sort of looking into it. But the element of women's cricket was, in my opinion, interesting because to start with, women's cricket in South Asia, but particularly in Pakistan, has always been the underdog. No one gave it a chance. If you go into the individual stories of these young women who've become the sort of standard bearers of the team, it's always a constant struggle against the odds, against their male counterparts not taking them seriously, against cricket boards who feel it's a waste of time and money to invest into their sport. And so for them to kind of make it to where they have is tremendous. And so the premise of the story is that, what if women's cricket in Pakistan explodes, so the women's team becomes fantastically successful in winning matches and tournaments, but with that success comes adulation and respect that they've always hankered for and wanted. But at the same time, that success brings with it those sorts of negative elements in the shape of match fixers and bookies that because they become a saleable commodity, or women's cricket becomes a saleable commodity, and so these same individuals who had in a previous generation affected men's cricket start to want to get in and start to the women's game to try and manipulate that.
I was really impressed by the actual cricket writing. It's like you're writing like it's a world war.
Yeah, I think, as Romesh said, it's funny that cricket is not something, that is widely written about, despite all, most of the English-speaking world having this sort of colonial, certainly, history as far as cricket is concerned. But we seem to, whatever writing you do have about cricket is very idyllic, the village green and that sort of stuff, and doesn't really focus on the sort of martial aspect of it, which is a lot of modern cricket, right? It's in your face. It's two sides pitted against each other in an almost gladiatorial contest.
Well, I think it was George Orwell who said, I don't know if it was cricket particularly, but he said sport doesn't create necessarily goodwill because it's war minus the shooting.
Exactly.
And also, there's no point in doing it unless you're doing it to win. Or at least to play properly.
Not necessarily. I think that's the difference. Sorry,
Maybe I'm just a psycho.
No, I mean, I think the modern game is becoming that way, particularly the one day and the 20, and when it's a short game. But the traditional Test cricket wasn't necessarily that. And I think that's where C.L.R. James, who you mentioned, who's the Caribbean philosopher, who wrote a lot about lots of things, literature particularly, but also cricket, because he's a cricket commentator. He wrote wonderful commentaries. And what he said was that the thing about cricket that made it a special kind of sport, it wasn't like other sports, because it was aesthetic. And watching cricket was like watching a Greek tragedy. So it was a spectacle in which the players are gladiators or actors, and you're watching them go through this process. It's not about the end of it, it's actually watching the process. And it's actually a beautifully done game when it's played properly, or when it's played anyway, actually. And people talk about football being the beautiful game, but it isn't. Actually, cricket is aesthetically beautiful, and you can see this if you watch, and now you can watch it on TV, but if you watch any photograph of a cricketer, it's a match between two arts. The photographer who photographs cricket is an artist, has to do it as an art form. And you'll see this particularly in the old photographs. If you see a picture of a bowler, it's beautifully composed, the arm and the leg. If you see a cricketer, and actually Sri Lankan cricketers are very good on this. They must have looked at a lot of photographs, because you always see when they finish a stroke, it's finished in a way that can be photographed, very beautifully framed. And that idea of spectacle is really, really important. And of course the crowd is also not necessarily always watching the end. They're actually watching the performance, and they'll cheer the performance, and you're only as good as your performance on that day.
I think the element of winning being everything really comes in and ties in with the colonial legacy of cricket. And you find this sort of desire to win coming about as each of the former colonies kind of start standing up. So if you see the Australians in the 30s with the advent of Bradman and this kind of desire to stick it to the English. And then as you see post-World War II, independence of all these other colonies like India, Pakistan, the West Indies, and this desire to sort of go, and especially to go on a tour to England and stick it to the old colonial masters. And I think that's where that's where we move away from the classic game to this thing of war minus the shooting.
And also the money.
And the money, yeah.
Now, I suppose the money makes a big difference whether you win or not.
And that's really where the fix comes in. And so, I mean, if you have a game, perhaps you're not necessarily playing to win, although I would argue that is the driving human instinct. Yeah. But once somebody starts interfering with that, of course, you don't know what you can trust. How does fixing work? So we can all
I'd be a far richer man if I knew that. I think it's especially, I think, within the subcontinent, it's an issue of match fixing or betting on sport, and cricket being the sort of most high profile sport, being a very lucrative source of income for organized crime. And you almost see the rise, if you map it, you see the rise of fixing and gambling as organized crime from the mid 1980s. As you see traditional organized crime syndicates in Pakistan and India particularly, but also in Sri Lanka, moving away from things that they were into previously, such as smuggling. As economies liberalize, they found cricket or betting on cricket to be a very lucrative alternative scheme of revenue. And especially in India and Pakistan, I'm not sure about Sri Lanka, the offset of punitive action. Even if you look at the law now, the criminal law dealing with bookies or gambling, the sort of the fines or the any kind of jail time, I think it's very, very minimal. So if you look at on the one side the amount of money that's being made, and you look at the punishment, which is essentially the same as a slap on the wrist, it's a very easy solution to get into this sort of stuff.
But isn't it also actually quite creative, the fixing? Because it's very inventive as to what is being bet on. It's not necessarily the end of the game. It's about whether somebody
ball by ball and
whether they take their handkerchief out of their pocket or not, or all sorts of things. So I think it's quite amazing.
So, really quite easy then, theoretically, for a player to be involved in that. You don't necessarily have to throw the whole match. You can just be...
Yes, you've had the advent of what we call spot fixing and what Romesh alluded to, where someone was, again recently a bookie, was showing me a new mobile app they developed, and they said, there's no point in the government or intelligence agencies monitoring our phones anymore, because now we can do it online. And the kind of spreads that he had, this was last week, just before the start of the PSL, it was amazing. You have to kind of give them credit for the creativity of the sort of situations that they can build up, which is a far greater spread than anything that you'd find in your betting shop, the average betting shop in Australia or the UK.
Yeah, and trying to convey all that on the page, and not just the fixing, but the match itself. As you say, Romesh, there's such beauty in it. And I wonder about the sort of the art of cricket writing.
I think that's a very good one. Actually, it's what I really when I was writing this book particularly, and I started getting interested in how to create it on the page. I began to understand the greater spectacle of cricket, and I discovered how many people actually enjoy cricket, but at a very strange level. People who love listening to cricket commentaries on the radio, who don't care about the game, don't understand the game, don't know anything about the game, but they just like the burble of the voice and the way these commentators talk. And these commentators become their lifelong friends, and that's why when a great commentator dies, it's like a huge tragedy, because these people have been companions, burbling into their ears about this incomprehensible match and how it's going on. And similarly, cricket writing, sports writing, the people who write in the sports pages about a cricket match, again, take, I think, tremendous care about how they write about the game. And it is beautiful writing. And I was reading stuff totally intoxicated by the writing, having no clue about who they're writing about or what's going on in the game, but able to appreciate as a piece of text almost. And I think that's, in a sense, that's the better side of cricket. It does draw something very good out of you.
I think, yeah, there's always been this tradition, and I think they've always said that cricket has engendered a lot more writing and literature on it than, say, football. The football is the more popular game, but it doesn't lend itself to poetic prose, whereas, you mentioned C.L.R. James, and right from then going through sort of a whole host of cricket writers, there is an artistry to the writing of cricket as well.
Yeah. I wondered perhaps we could hear a little
I
cricket
set it
writing.
up a bit too much now. This is nothing like that, nothing like that at all. But I'll just read you a little bit to give you a flavor of how a book about cricket can also be not a book about cricket. And when this came out, as I said, there weren't very many. Now, of course, it's a genre. There are a lot, and particularly in India, a lot of Indian writers and Pakistani writers who are writing cricket novels, which are much more centrally about cricket. But this one, I'll just read you a passage from towards the end when my hero Sonny, he's a guy called Sonny Fernando, and he doesn't know much about cricket. He played a little bit of cricket, but he has a teenage son, and as this son's growing up, and the Sri Lankan team visits London, he thinks this is a way of connecting with his past and with his son and all of that sort of stuff. But he's also trying to be a photographer. So this is where the photography and the cricket come in from what I'm going to read. Now I'll read you a section when they go to a match at the Oval, and Sri Lanka are playing India, and Tendulkar is on the Indian team as well. I haven't got all of it to hand, but it begins with Sonny. Oh, can I have a little aside on Sonny? When I wrote this book, I remember going to an interview with a man called Mark Lawson on the BBC, who I hadn't met before. I went in. He's a big guy sitting there, he's looking at this book, and I was quite terrified going to this interview because just before I went in, I was told he is a cricket fanatic and knows everything about cricket, and I know nothing about cricket. But the first thing he told me was, "It's very clever of you, Romesh. It's very clever of you. You managed to get all the famous cricketers into this book, aren't they? All your characters are named after famous cricketers." And I said, "Really? Okay, fine." So that is absolute luck on my part, but apparently they are. So anyway, this is a real match, and I did go to it, part of my research. And to me, it's a very famous match because Tendulkar does something unusual in it. But Sonny goes to the match. It's a one-day international in London. It's nothing like normal English cricket, if you like the village cricket people talk about. This is cricket where the decibels are really high. Everyone's shouting. There's confetti all over the place. Everyone's screaming their heads off. And Sonny is watching this mesmerized. And I'll just read you this little section where basically Sri Lanka is doing really, really badly. And they've managed to get 2 Indian wickets. And there's some faint hope among the Sri Lankans. And they're beginning to say, things might be looking up. Then Tendulkar stepped forward and smashed a long, hard drive. The ball, a round white bullet, shot across the grass towards a few fat pigeons congregated on an empty patch of the ground. The birds were pecking at the earth and waddling about, ignoring the mad, momentous game around them, unaware of the tribal needs, the chameleon identities, the laws of science, and the art of hitting ducks. The ball sped into their midst and caused a flurry. The bird in the middle didn't stand a chance. The ball hit it. The pigeon keeled over. Play stopped. The whole of the oval was hushed. The nearest fielder walked over and picked up the bird as though it were the dove of peace. He carried it slowly towards the boundary. Sonny knew then that this was the photograph for him. He ran down to the rope faster than a long leg might break to stop a boundary ball. He kept the lens aperture small, knowing that in his photograph, the sky would be a bowl where newspaper confetti floated like circling buzzards, while in the center, a pair of clasped hands prayed to a dying bird. Its feathers trembled just enough to blur in and out of perfect focus like life itself. He clicked the shutter before the groundsman bucket swung into view to collect the corpse. He didn't even need a light meter. There's something significant happening here, he knew, no matter what the outcome of the game would be. Perhaps it was the power to silence that comes with death, however small the life, and our need to overcome it, to find some brief moment of care, hope, the tender possibility of renewal. This man, this game, this bird was salvation. The timing was perfect. Anything seemed possible. Peace, love, joy, life everlasting. It was all in the frame.
Lovely. Very lovely.
He was hoping that photograph would win him a prize and change his life forever.
Omar, do you want to read?
No, I haven't really prepared anything.
Okay.
And I could not match that performance either, so...
What's really interesting, talking about the crowd and the confetti and all the rest of it, and you make this point really near the beginning of your book about how once you add in the crowd, that completely changes the dynamic. The game is not just a cricket game anymore. There's some whole other area going on.
Yeah, and you know, in the context of the fix, it's about the women's team playing and not being used to playing in front of packed houses. And as you said, the crowd almost becomes like a 12th player because there is a physical impact that brings with it pressure, the pressure of expectation, the pressure of failing in front of so many. And if you're not used to that, and of course you see this, you know, in the men's game as well, but especially with the women's game, in a game where, you know, if you're used to kind of playing on empty college greens and university grounds and with 5 people in the bleachers, and all of a sudden you're in a stadium that's filled with 25 to 30,000 screaming fans. It changes the fundamental nature of the game.
And it makes it so much more important in terms of geopolitics as well. Once you've got all of these people supporting something, you're in a position to make a really powerful political statement.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, India-Pakistan is, of course, the sort of best example of that, although there are others as well in cricket, but where it replaces politics, or it's politics by other means.
Yeah, in Zimbabwe, there was a very famous match where Henry Olonga, who was a bowler, and Andy Flower, who then went on to coach the England team, they were playing in South Africa, and they wore black armbands for the death of democracy, and it was a terrible thing. Olonga never went home again. He came to Britain. Flower had both of them banned from Zimbabwe. Yeah. I was banned for reporting on it. It was, the whole thing became so much more than cricket. It was extraordinary. And I just think when you look at that, and even looking at your own Prime Minister here, how important cricket has become. And I mean, if you go back to that particular World Cup, I believe it was in 2003, with all these teams having to go through this sort of, and I remember it was Nasir Hussain, who was the English captain, who said that, I shouldn't be the one to have to make a decision whether to play in Zimbabwe. This is a political decision which has been cast on my shoulders. I'm just a cricketer. So there are all these facets that come into it. Absolutely. Is it political in Sri Lanka?
I think it is. The politics come into it. But there's, I think, also a wider one, isn't there? I mean, there is the kind of direct politics between the team and the nation, that sort of thing. But there's also, I think, in the game itself and in the spectators in it, India and Pakistan are very, very special pairing, I suppose. But outside that pairing, but maybe even in that, it's interesting how people's allegiances change, or how the crowd can support a team. And obviously the players draw huge strength from the crowd and the people who support, from their fans. And even if it's a small fan base, if they're playing in another country and there's only a handful of people, if they make a lot of sound, it does keep the players going. But it's very interesting, actually, at this match that I was describing, which I was there, it was a real match, it really happened. The Sri Lankan fans were completely outnumbered by the Indian fans, by, 100-fold, as it were. And so I was sitting there, and there were a few Sri Lankan fans. But it was interesting how, when the Indian players were not playing so well, and the Sri Lankan batsman, I can't remember who it was, but it must have been Mahela Jayawardene, hit a 6, and then another one. And suddenly these guys, there was a guy who was cheering in front of me, he was getting the crowd up, he had all these very dodgy chants that he would have, But at one point, he suddenly, two things happened. One was when the Indians were playing well, he suddenly said, there was an English guy next to me in the row down, and this guy turned to him and said, "So who do you support? Where are you from?" And he says, "I support England." "Who do you support?" "I support India." So then he started saying, "Oh, well, what's your name?" "Hutton." "Well, Hutton is an Indian. Hutton is an Indian." And then he went on through everybody. Henman is an Indian. All the tennis players were Indian. Everybody. And then when they were playing badly, he turned around and said, "Oh, look, Sri Lankan. We are all Sri Lankan now." And everyone was chanting, "We're all Sri Lankan now. Hit them all." And went on and on. And you find that kind of allegiance just generally as well. And all of us probably have a kind of, not an algorithm, but a table. So when England plays Australia, you support Australia because it's against England. And there's a whole lot. And Sri Lanka actually is very popular. Lots of people support Sri Lanka, even though they support their own team. So if Sri Lanka is playing anyone, they tend to support them as the underdog or whatever.
I think cricket fans generally have a great affinity for the underdog, and I remember the 1996 World Cup which Sri Lanka won, and in Pakistan they garnered a lot of fans just because of the fact that two of the countries, I think the West Indies and Australia, had refused to play in Sri Lanka. So the Pakistanis said, well, these guys. I remember being at the final, which was here in the Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore, and there was a young Australian. He was a kid. He was like 7, 8 years old, and Australia were doing quite badly because the Sri Lankans were hitting them all over. So this kid started crying, and there was a very typical Lahori sitting next to him, who kind of snubbed him and said, "Shut up." And the other Lahori sitting next to him said, "The kid's crying. He's supporting his team. Let him be." And he said, "Yeah, our hearts were also bad when we lost to India, so he should shut up and take it now." So I think there's cricket fans are very quick to transfer their allegiances to the next best thing.
So how then do you think that cricket defines a nation?
Do you want to take
I find that really interesting, how teams and identity works. And of course, it's all now confused with the IPLs and so on, these Premier Leagues where people are moving around, like in football. So no longer do you identify individuals by country or nationality. It's to do with who they're playing and so on. And people have allegiance to individual players. So in a sense, those boundaries kind of are strengthened through these sorts of events, but also are weakened. And people can. So actually, when this book was set, was a time when the peace process had a glimmer of hope in Sri Lanka between the in the Civil War. And at that match, for example, Sri Lanka was being supported by Tamil fans as well as Sinhala fans. And at the end of the game, even though they lost, there was a lot of camaraderie between the two. So I think it can come together. How it defines a nation, I think only in the broader sense. There are cricket-playing nations and there are not non-cricket playing nations. Just like among groups of people, there are book-reading people and there are people who don't read books. And that's the biggest difference between them.
I think it's also, I think, where you are as a nation. I think if you look at the sort of history of most of the cricket-playing countries, cricket has played a very important nation-building role as a kind of as a cultural entity where you can bind yourself behind when those countries were unsure of themselves. So you find cricket being a great unifier for Australia in the first half of the 20th century, when the country was still trying to find itself. Similarly, cricket becoming a great central unifying point in Pakistan over the last 30, 40 years. Actually, really almost from the independence of Pakistan, but even more important in the last 30, 40 years, where I think as nations who are younger nations and still trying in their adolescence, trying to find a place for themselves in the world, pride in cricket or pride in the cricket team or the national team becomes much more important. And as you grow older or more mature as a nation, it matters less. So perhaps cricket is not as important as a unifying force in Australia today as it was 70 years ago. Certainly not as important in England. So I think it's related to that. It's related to where you are as a nation.
I think that time scale is interesting. I mean, it's interestingly, America, the US, had a cricket team in the 1800s and played against England and won. I can't remember who the team players were, but presumably they were English as part of the Union. It was that sort of period. And of course now I think, again, there is a move towards getting a cricket team, which would be South Asian basically, but American.
Teach the Americans to be civil.
And then, I remember reading about a few years ago, it's kind of disappeared, but maybe it'll come back when the Chinese decided they wanted to play cricket and started spending a lot of money getting coaches in. Yeah. And so I wouldn't be surprised in 10 years' time if they produce a top team.
We're going to open the floor to the audience in just a moment, but just before we do, cricket has come home here to Lahore, and with it, I feel this kind of palpable excitement here on the streets. It does seem to have really influenced people in this city that you've got this fabulous match going on.
Yeah, I think it's although it's the fifth year of this Pakistan Super League, but it's the first time that they're having all the matches in Pakistan. It seems that this time round there does seem to be, as you said, a greater air of excitement. And also I think with Pakistan, I think we, and I don't think anyone will disagree with me in the crowd, we as a nation took it quite badly. We took it almost as a rejection when teams stopped coming for security reasons. And I think the fact that now all these franchise teams with players from all over the place, are coming and are spending 5 weeks or whatever in Pakistan, in country, and not really complaining about it. And there are no ostensible issues about security or even other logistical problems. It seems to be a feel-good thing after, was it now almost 10 years since the attack on the Sri Lankan team? So cricket really is coming home in that sense.
Fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience? I'm quite sure that there will be. There's a microphone here that will be brought to you. If it could go first to the person at the back there, and then forward to the person there. Thank you. Just coming to you now. You heard that?
I didn't quite hear it.
I think the second question was about the influence of the big three on modern cricket politics, and the first one is how T20 is moving us away from the cricket of the village green, right? Do you want to take this? Do you want me to take that?
Start off.
On the second one, of course, it's cricket is kind of the financial or comparative financial power in cricket has made it a playing field that's not level. But to be fair, that's also true if you look at football, and especially the big sort of teams. You have a league of the 8 or 9 biggest clubs in Europe being, 5 steps ahead of everyone else. Is it fair? No, obviously it's not fair. But it is what it is. But I think what leagues like the PSL do is that they show that there is also a space if you're not part of the big three, right? So there is a niche or a space that you can create. And the fact that, for instance, Pakistan remains a very competitive team, especially in the shorter formats of the game, despite having been frozen out in a lot of places by the big three, shows everyone else that there are still, sometimes cricket or the passion of fans finds its own medium to settle in.
Yeah, I think it is that idea that there is room for all kinds. And it's interesting that quite often people who love the short game, the one-day game or the T20 game, are not necessarily the same ones who would like the longer form, the longer test match. And they're very separate sorts of things. And I see it in literary terms, actually, naturally, being who I am. So for me, the short form game is very much like the short story, and the test match is very much like the novel. And you find this difference among readers as well. There are readers who love a novel but who just can't understand why anyone would bother to read a short story. And then there are others who just love the short story because it's short and you get it quick and everything else, and who can't understand how anyone could spend hours reading the same novel. And to me, the cricket is also like that. Lots of people can't understand how anyone could bother with a match that goes on for more than 4 days.
You had a question there. Yeah. Just wait for the microphone if you would. Oh, it's already gone there. We'll come to you right after that. Okay, so this gentleman after you. Yeah.
My question is to Sir Omar Shahid Hamid. What is moving from globalization to regionalization? And what are your views on the Indianization of cricket?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I think the mic, if you just speak in, is it on?
Hello.
वैसे आप बोल दें.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, world is moving from globalization to regionalization. And what are your views about the Indianization of cricket, especially the association?
Okay.
And sir, my second question is that, as I am secretary in Punjab Police, I would like to ask, what are your...
आपकी आज PSL पर ड्यूटी नहीं लगी लगता है.
No, sir. Sir, what would you do to promote the cricket and football and volleyball in police department as it is done in the army to entertain their mental and health facilities? Thank you.
I think choose one.
I'll choose the second one.
Yeah.
That's a good question, and it's an important question because traditionally the services have throughout the subcontinent provided patronage for games to develop. So if you look at the customs and hockey and Indian railways for cricket in India, and we are in fact trying to do that in Sindh as it happens. I'm also the chief selector of the Sindh police cricket team, and one of the things that we're trying to do is make it a space where we can promote talent, we can get and it's a very important regimental activity as well. So it's part. It builds morale. It builds an esprit de corps, and of course the kind of the hang up to that, or the thing that holding it back, is that unlike the past, all government departments do not have the same level of financial largesse as was the case previously. So you can't, for instance, recruit people on a cricket basis and have them do nothing else. So for instance, in the Sindh police team, everyone who plays is recruited on a regular basis but has a cricket background. So it's those sorts of things, but I agree with you that government departments and all have traditionally played a big role, and as sports and as the bottom line becomes more and more important, I think there's a space where they should continue to play that role.
Thank you. It was you next. Sorry, we're just going to take this man here because he's been waiting a long time. Yeah.
No, I don't need a mic. Lovely panel, very learned panel. I have a less learned comment, which is that sport is very obviously the arena of politics. And particularly Omar has been talking about the social aspect of it. I was wondering whether your next novel might be aimed at that. Because in Pakistan particularly, cricket has been used and other sports have been used for both sides. From the fascist side, Zia-ul-Haq used it to detract from the lack of democracy, or the fascists have used sport, Mussolini and Hitler, etc., used the Olympics. And yet you also have the positive side, which is making Rapinoe can turn around and say, I will not be Trump, and I will also not ask my team to be Trump. So I was wondering to draw your next novel out in that direction.
It's a very interesting point, because I think wherever you've seen sport used as a political tool by authoritarian regimes, you also find, if you look at the story of football, for instance, and you find that in the Franco years, Real Madrid was the establishment team. And yet it was in that period that Barcelona, who were the outsiders, who was, the Catalans, continued their amazing run of success in the 1950s and all. So it was almost a middle finger to the Spanish establishment. I think similarly you find with cricket as well that and not just in Pakistan but across the world, where dictators or authoritarian regimes have tried to appropriate the sport, the sports fans have found their own kind of direction and way to kind of use it as a counter symbol of protest, or again showing the middle finger to the establishment. I don't know if my next book will be about that, but it's an idea.
There was a man there with the mic.
Thank you very much for enlightening us with your cricketing knowledge. I would like to share one thing. You made a mention of cricket commentators. I remember Mr. the late Omar Qureshi. In fact, a whole generation of Pakistan grew up listening to his commentary, and obviously they produced a very fantastic English literature. So Omar Qureshi, Jamshed Marker. So I think it's not a question but a suggestion that these writers, just as you are, they should be taught to our English language students in our institutions. So that also can be an important role of cricket in our country.
The question of cricket commentary is interesting, because the trend now is that you have former players. And I think the point that Romesh made was that if you look at the great English cricket commentators historically, whether, as you mentioned, Jamshed Marker and Omar Qureshi or John Arlott in England, they were not cricketers.
Yeah.
They were journalists, and their command over language was so perfect that they kind of, whole generations do that. Whereas if you find the average retired ex-captain, his comments will be quite banal, to be honest. So actually you see that standards have fallen.
We're going to have to move on. Actually, we've got time for one last question.
They were broadcasters.
I'm so sorry. We're going to move on to this last question.
Sorry?
Sorry, didn't catch the last bit.
I think ये जो मैं आपके सवाल समझ गया जो I think the question I answered to the first gentleman covers that. Obviously, money brings clout, and that's the bottom line, right? That money has brought the Indian Cricket Board in particular a clout that is beyond sort of it enables them to sort of punch above their weight. ये कोई पार्लिमानी डिबेट हो रहा है क्या यहाँ?
We're going to have to stop, I'm afraid. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, and thank you to our
Okay.
panel, to